1 pound of beef, 8 servings. No waste. This wartime meatloaf is how families stretched rationed beef through an entire week. 1 cup of rolled oats, stale bread, milk, and a ketchup glaze that comes out of the oven almost black. I am going to show you the full process today, but do not skip the mixing step. One mistake there will make the whole loaf tight and rubbery, and you will not know until it is already sliced and on the table. 1 medium onion, finely chopped. Into a large mixing bowl, chop it as finely as possible. Large pieces of onion stay visible in the finished loaf and create soft spots in the texture that the surrounding meat cannot compensate for. The onion should almost disappear into the mixture before the beef goes in. 1 cup of rolled oats directly on top of the onion. 2 slices of day-old bread, crusts off, torn into rough pieces, and soaked in a small amount of milk for about 2 minutes until soft. In with the oats. The bread needs to be fully saturated. Press it into the milk and turn it over so every part absorbs evenly. Dry patches of bread in the bowl become dry patches in the finished loaf. Use rolled oats only, not instant, not steel cut. Instant oats absorb liquid too fast and turn the inside of the loaf to mush. Steel cut stays too firm and never softens through, even after an hour in the oven. Rolled oats sit exactly in the middle. They absorb at the right rate, become completely invisible in the finished texture, and hold on to every drop of fat and juice the beef releases during baking. 1 egg, half a cup of milk, 1 teaspoon of salt, 1 teaspoon of black pepper, 2 tablespoons of ketchup, all of it into the bowl. Mix everything together thoroughly before the beef comes anywhere near it. The filler ingredients need to be fully combined first. When the ground beef goes in on top of a base that is already uniform, it distributes evenly through every part of the mixture. Add the beef at the same time as everything else, and it clumps in one area while the oats sit in dry patches on the other side. Dense pockets of meat beside dry sections of grain that cook at different rates. The slices fall apart and the texture is unpredictable from one bite to the next. Mix until the oats, soaked bread, onion, egg, and milk are completely combined. No dry patches of oats, no pools of liquid standing in the bowl. The mixture should look uniform in color and texture from one side of the bowl to the other. Then stop. 500 grams of ground beef. Into the bowl over the base. This is the step I warned you about at the start. What you do in the next 30 seconds determines the texture of every slice. Overmixing activates the muscle proteins. What comes out of the oven is a dense, rubbery brick instead of a tender slice. Mix by hand until there are no visible streaks of unmixed beef and no unmixed oat paste anywhere in the bowl. Work from the outside of the bowl inward, folding rather than stirring. Folding incorporates the beef into the base without compressing the mixture. Stirring does the opposite. It works the proteins against each other and starts the toughening process before the loaf is even in the pan. Fold until uniform, then stop. Hands out of the bowl. While the mixture is sitting, have you ever made a meatloaf before? Almost every culture has a version of this. Some use breadcrumbs, some use rice, some use oats. All of them built around the same core logic of stretching a limited amount of meat into something that feeds more people than the meat alone could manage. Did you grow up eating something like this? Drop it in the comments. Butter or lard, a generous coat inside the loaf pan, every corner including the rim. Do not use cooking spray. It does not coat the corners and edges the way solid fat does, and those are the spots most likely to stick when the loaf comes out. Transfer the mixture into the pan and press it in firmly. Fill the corners and edges first, then smooth the top flat with the back of a wet hand. Pressing firmly removes air pockets. Air pockets trapped inside the loaf create gaps that cook faster than the surrounding meat. When the loaf is sliced, those gaps collapse and the slice falls apart. Press solidly and the loaf holds together cleanly from one end. The ketchup is not decoration. It caramelizes over the 1-hour bake into a dark, sticky glaze that adds a sweet, sharp contrast the plain beef surface cannot produce on its own. It also acts as the visual doneness signal when the top is deep red and the edges are slightly darkened and beginning to pull away from the rim. The loaf is done without opening the oven to check with a thermometer. Wartime cooks put ketchup on top because it was the most efficient use of a small amount of condiment. Maximum flavor impact, minimum quantity used. Oven to 175 degrees Celsius, 350 Fahrenheit. Loaf pan in the center rack. Center rack keeps the loaf at an even distance from both the top and bottom elements. Too close to the bottom and the underside overcooks before the center sets. Too close to the top and the glaze burns before the loaf is cooked through. Bake for 1 hour. Do not open the oven for the first 40 minutes. The loaf needs that uninterrupted time to set its structure from the outside inward. Opening the door releases heat, drops the internal temperature, and resets the cooking process. Every time the oven door opens in the first 40 minutes, add 5 minutes to the total bake time. The oven stays closed. At the 1-hour mark, dark red glaze across the top, edges pulling slightly from the pan. A thin-bladed knife inserted into the thickest part of the center comes out clean with no wet batter clinging to it. If the knife comes out with any moisture on it, give the loaf another 10 minutes and check again. Out of the oven. Leave it in the pan for 10 full minutes before slicing. This rest is not optional. The loaf continues cooking from residual heat during those 10 minutes, and the center reaches its final temperature without any additional oven time. More importantly, the internal juices redistribute through the entire loaf. Slice immediately out of the oven, and those juices run out across the board, leaving every slice dry. Wait 10 minutes, and each slice stays moist and intact from edge to edge. Set a timer. 10 minutes feels longer than it is when the loaf is sitting on the counter. Slice the loaf. Look at what comes out. The ketchup glaze has gone almost black at the very top and fades to deep red halfway down. The edges have pulled cleanly from the sides of the pan. The texture is dense and completely uniform from the first slice to the last. No dry pockets, no gaps, no crumbling at the edges when the knife passes through. The oats have disappeared completely. You cannot see them, cannot identify them as a separate ingredient. What you taste is a loaf that is noticeably moister and more cohesive than straight ground beef could ever produce on its own, because the oats absorbed every drop of fat and juice the beef released during baking and held it inside the structure of every slice. I take a slice straight from the board. The inside is moist all the way through, no dry center, no crumbling at the edge. That is what the oats did. Every drop of fat the beef released during baking is still inside the slice. 6 to 8 servings from 1 pound of beef, 1 cup of oats, and 2 slices of bread. The leftovers are better the next day. Cold meatloaf sliced the following morning holds together more cleanly than it did hot, and the flavor has developed overnight as everything in the loaf settles further. Wartime families understood this. The loaf was always made to last several meals, not just the first sitting. To store beyond a few days. Let the loaf cool completely down to room temperature, not just warm to the touch, fully cool. Slice into individual portions. Slicing before freezing means individual portions can be reheated one at a time without defrosting the whole loaf. Wrap each slice in parchment paper first, then a tight layer of aluminum foil. Remove as much air as possible from both layers as you wrap. Press the foil against the shape of the slice rather than leaving space around it. Air trapped inside the wrapping is what causes freezer burn, not the temperature itself. Air causes freezer burn over time. Freezer burn degrades the texture and destroys the flavor that the hour of baking built. The 2 layers of wrapping with no trapped air is the only barrier between that slice and a year of freezer environment working against it. Properly wrapped and stored at consistent freezer temperature, each slice keeps for up to 1 year. To reheat, frozen slice directly into a pan, a small amount of water added, lid on, 5 to 7 minutes over medium-low heat. The water creates steam inside the covered pan and rehydrates the surface of the slice as it warms through. What comes out tastes exactly as it did the day it was made. The glaze is almost black at the top. The oats that went in raw an hour ago have vanished completely into the texture. Every slice carries the same ratio of meat, grain, and egg from one end to the other. 1 pound of beef, 8 servings. A year in the freezer if it makes it that far. Tell me in the comments, what wartime recipe do you want me to bring back next?